testing conditions are like, timing, some little strategies. And then we're going to get into a release test to see what some of the questions are really like. So I'm still letting a few people in. So while I'm speaking, if anybody has any general questions that you guys want me to address, we can start with that for like the first 5-ish minutes while everybody's getting settled down and still joining. And then I'll jump into what the test really looks like. Does that sound good to everybody? And all questions you guys are free to just throw into the chat. So somebody said, what do you think was the most helpful thing that I did while preparing for the SHSAT? So the biggest thing that you can do is practice, a million times practice. You have to know the content of the exam, but you also have to be really familiar with what the questions look like, what the strategies are like. It's a timed test, so you want to make sure that you're ready for that vigorous sort of testing atmosphere. And the only way you can do that is if you practice taking full-length exams, which is something that Queller Prep really emphasizes. That's something that you do at least once a week in a course here. And that's something that you absolutely need to do to succeed on any standardized test, I would say, but especially on this one. Any other questions before I start? And we'll definitely have like more of a question period at the end of this also, and I can stay later than 8 o'clock, and you guys can ask me anything at all. Okay, so I don't see any other questions coming in, so I'm gonna go ahead and scroll and start talking about what the reading section of the exam really looks like. And anytime as I'm speaking, if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So the reading section of the SHSAT is there's two parts of it. There's one part that's revising and editing, and this part is focused on grammar. So for grammar, we have to make sure that all the students are aware of grammar rules, of sentence structures, transition words, paragraph structures. And there's two types of grammar questions. There's standalone questions, which we'll go over first because those are usually the beginning of the exam. So these are what the standalone questions look like. Each question stands alone. It asks you a separate sort of thing about a paragraph or about a sentence. And then as we scroll through, they also have grammar passages, and these are more about like coherency, whether or not the paragraphs make sense, topic sentences, transition words, things like that. And then after this, sometimes there's two of these, sometimes there's one. Actually, on the latest SHSAT, they added more grammar, so there was two. And after that, there's a reading comprehension section. And this is all sorts of different passages. Some of them are nonfiction, some of them are historical accounts, some of them are fiction. And this you're reading for comprehension. So this, we need to be aware of literary devices. We need to be aware of various ways that authors may have emotional appeals or logical appeals and how they make an argument. So this part of the reading section, I think, is one of the most difficult because there's not a lot of rules that you can memorize. This one is really a lot about practice and strategy, which I'll talk about when we get there. So I'm going to jump into the test in a second. I want to answer some questions that came into the chat. So somebody asked if the SHSAT changed since I've taken it. Absolutely, it has changed. But I tutored it last year and the year before that. So I'm very familiar with the newest exam. And even though the test has changed, there's a lot of old relics in it. So when I took it, there was like a logic section in the math, and there's no longer a logic section, but I see relics of that. So in the math, there's many logical reasoning questions, which we also cover. All right, anybody has any other questions on the overview that I did before I go ahead and I start with the exam? Okay, so I'm going to jump into the exam. So the first question is a really standard question. It's asking us how to combine the sentences. So when we're thinking about combining sentences, one thing that you really have to focus on is what is the relationship between the sentences? Because when we combine them, we need to know relationships. And once you know the relationship, whether the two sentences are saying the same thing, if they're saying opposing things, if one sentence is supporting detail of the sentence before, All of these things are important because they tell us how we should connect the sentences. They tell us whether or not we should use a special transition word, whether or not they should stay two separate sentences, etc. So when you see a question that asks you about combination, that's exactly what I want you guys to think about in your head. I want you to think, what is the relationship? So I'm going to go ahead and take some notes here. And you guys should be able to have access to my notes at the end, but I 100% recommend all of you to annotate and take notes as I'm doing it because it'll help you remember it better. So the first thing when we see the word combine, you should think about what is the relationship. So relationships between sentences. And when we're thinking about relationships, like I mentioned, one thing that we really care about is transition words. So once you figure out the relationship, for example, the sentences are contrasting, that tells me that I can use a word like but or a word like however. The second sentence is a supporting detail to the first. I know that I can use something like for example or for instance. So these are just different examples that I can think of before we even touch the question. This is what should be going through your head. And then the second thing that we care about is grammar, right? So we want to make sure that the way that we're adding the sentences, we're not just clumping them together, right? We can't just combine sentences without any periods or any semicolons or any commas and fanboys and words like that. So you want to make sure that the transition word is correct. So we're combining for meaning and we're also combining for grammar. So those are the two main things that I want you to think about. And then the second important thing to keep in mind for this exam specifically is how wordy you're being. So the SHSAT does not want you to be wordy. They want you to be succinct. So we want to combine the sentences, but we also want to make sure that we're not adding extra words. We're not being very wordy. We're not being very long. So obviously, when you're doing the test, you are not going to be teaching, right? So you're not going to be taking all this time to write these things down. These things should be in your head automatically. That's what's going to make you guys great test takers, right? That's how I take tests. As soon as I see a question, I'm circulating these thoughts. And as I'm thinking this, once I read the questions, I'm already going to have some idea of how I would want to combine them in my head. And then I just need to find the answer choice that best matches what I already created in my head. That way we don't get lost in any sort of trick answer choices that they throw at you, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and read out loud the three sentences that we're trying to connect. So the first sentence says, scientists now believe that Jupiter may have as many as 79 moons. So the subject here is really scientists, and the topic is kind of about Jupiter. Then they say one of Jupiter's moons is named Io, and then it says Io has the greatest number of active volcanoes in the solar system. So what I'm seeing is sort of a hierarchy, right? So this first sentence is the broadest, that scientists believe Jupiter may have many moons. And then this sentence is an example. Here's one moon, right? And then this sentence is further on. Now we mentioned the specific Io, and the third sentence is now discussing the specific Io. So the hierarchy is always when you write a paragraph or when you're combining, you want to start broad and then you get to general. And that's how this is written. So that's what I'm sort of thinking about as I'm thinking about how I'm going to combine them. So once I read choice A, it says Io, which is one of Jupiter's moons, has the greatest number of active volcanoes, and scientists now believe that Jupiter may have as many as 79 moons. Right away, I can tell that this is probably not the best answer choice because I just explained to you guys the hierarchy, right? It goes broad and then it gets specific. So this is doing the opposite. We started with the most specific. We started with Io and then we got to all the moons. So that's sort of a way that you can know right away that that's not the best answer choice, even before reading the best, because you always want to start broad and then you get more and more and more specific. And this is a rule that's true for your writing also. If you guys remember how we write essays, how you learned in class, you want to start with a broad topic sentence and then you get into the supporting details. So same rules apply here. So A, I can throw out right away. Now I'm going to read B. It says, scientists now believe that Jupiter may have as many as 79 moons, and one of them is named Io, which has the greatest number of active volcanoes in the solar system. So far, not bad, right? They're following that general idea that I just explained of broad to specific, but I don't know if I'm sold. I want to see if there's maybe a less wordy option that does the same thing. So now choice C says, scientists now believe that Jupiter may have as many as 79 moons, including one named Io, which has the greatest number of active volcanoes in the solar system. So notice that choice B and C are very similar in structure, right? We go from broad to specific like we talked about, but choice C is more succinct. So choice C wins. So in terms of relationships, between the sentences, B and C are doing the same thing, but that's why we have point number 2. Which one is more succinct? C has less words. That makes it more succinct, less wordy, and we're not removing any vital information. We're just taking out filler words, which is preferred. So C is our answer, and D, oops, sorry guys, just crashed. And D is no good either, because notice we're starting specific again. We're starting with IO again. So this is how the choice here for everybody should have been between B and C. And the way that you choose C over B is because of the succinctness. Okay, so this is a general overview of how we think through questions on the SHSAT, how we get to the correct answer. Anybody have any questions so far in this first one? And just scrolling quickly through the chat, yeah, that's correct. There's 114 questions. You have 3 hours to complete it. What's unique about the SHSAT is that you have 3 hours for the whole thing. So they don't time you on reading and they don't time you on math. They just give you 3 hours. So students have their own ability to manage their own time depending on strengths and weaknesses, which is something pretty unique about this exam. No, you can start with math first, or you can start with reading first. Okay, anybody have any other questions before I keep going? Okay, so we're going to keep going. So this one says, which revision corrects the error in sentence structure in the paragraph? So the main thing here is the word sentence structure. So that's what they're asking us about. So when I hear sentence structure, I'm thinking again about sort of constructing sentences, like what goes into the mechanics of combining sentences. And these are words like commas. These are things like commas, rather, transition words, things like semicolons. All of those goes into the mechanism of actually writing and combining sentences. So that's what they mean by sentence structure. And if you look at the options, we can see like all these commas. So that's kind of a guess for you of what they're really testing. So one big thing that I suggest that everybody knows about sentence structure is generally, how do we combine two sentences? So what are the different ways that we can combine two sentences? So I'm going to go over that briefly using this question. So the big topic for us is, how do we combine sentences? Just the mechanics, right? So one really obvious way that I'm sure most of you know is just the way that we usually write. So we finish a sentence, we put a period, and then we write a capital letter. Now, this isn't really combination of sentences, but this is a completely valid, grammatically correct way to write. And this is how most of us do it. So I want to make sure that this is included and on our list. Number 2 is using a semicolon. So anytime that you feel that you can end a sentence and write a capital letter and start a new sentence, instead of doing this, you can just use a semicolon and keep everything lowercase. So way 1 and 2 are entirely 100% grammatically equivalent. And then the last way is you can use a comma, and you can use one of these special words called Fanboys. So Fanboys is a common acronym that maybe you guys have heard of, but I'm going to go over it right now. So what Fanboys stand for is the F is for the A is for and, the N is for nor, this is for boy, this is for or, yet, and so. So some people are asking me, can you always use a semicolon? You can always use a semicolon instead of a period. Semicolons combine two completely full sentences. And the reason why we have these two methods is just for variability, right? So you want to vary your sentences and have different sentence structures. Authors want to do that. And this is how you can do that. Instead of always putting a period, you can put a semicolon. It creates sort of a longer thought. That's the mechanical difference, but grammatically, there's no difference. They're equivalent. And what I want to mention here is that we absolutely cannot use just a comma to combine two fully independent sentences. So a big no-no, I'm going to put an X here. We cannot have a full sentence, comma, full sentence. This is completely not allowed. Oh, sorry, I wrote boy, but it should be but. It's embarrassing. Thanks for catching that. This stands for but. Okay, so absolutely we cannot use a comma to combine two full sentences. This is a really commonly tested mistake. So they'll put an option like this, and this is usually wrong. And this mistake is called a run-on. So we want to avoid this as much as possible. So I'm going to write here run-on. And then if I can give you guys a really basic example and just zoom in here. Let's say something like, I have a dog. My dog is cute. So this is a completely valid way. This is grammatically correct. The way that we usually write just a period and a new sentence. Way 2 would say, I have a dog. My dog is cute. And then way 3 would be, I have a dog, comma, and my dog is cute, is an example. And way 3 is a little bit more intense than the other ways because you can emphasize the relationship. For example, if you use the word but, you can emphasize that the sentences are contrasting. Or if you use the word yet, that's also contrast. So is cause and effect, and is kind of like similar ideas. So way 3 is a little bit special because not only are we just mechanically combining the sentences, we're also telling our readers what the relationship is. And then lastly, another way that we can combine these is we can use special words. So for example, I can say, I have a dog who is cute. And that is, we're not combining exactly two independent sentences anymore. We're combining it into one thought. And that's usually the most succinct way. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But mechanically, these are the really 3 ways that you guys should absolutely know. Okay, so now let's go ahead and read this and see if we can find the mistake. So in September 2016, the National Museum of American History and Culture opened as part of the Smithsonian Institution. So notice I'm going to highlight the sentence, and so far it makes sense that after the word institution, I would put a period. And the way that I know that is it's a full, complete thought. So how do we know if something's a full, complete thought? Something needs to have a subject and something needs to have a predicate, or a topic, a noun, and a verb. So those are the 2 main things that all sentences need to have. And this sentence has the subject, which is the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And it also has the verb. What did it do? It opened. So now we have a comma, which is important to keep in mind because I just told you guys that run-ons are very commonly tested. So the first thing that I'm thinking when I see a sentence that seems like it's a complete thought, and now we have a comma, I'm like, they're probably giving me a run-on sentence on purpose because that's commonly tested on the SHSAT. So next I see the museum is already the Smithsonian's 3rd most popular site, which again is a full sentence, right? So right away I can see that this is where the mistake is. This is a run-on. The way it's written right now, this is a run-on sentence. And this is very commonly tested. So we were expecting this. And now how do we fix it? Well, the only one that is addressing this problem is choice E, but notice how they fixed it. They put a comma and they added the word and, which based on what I just taught you guys is completely grammatically legal because and is one of the fanboys. And that's exactly, they used basically method 3 to combine. So E is our choice here. Does that make sense? And yeah, some people are critiquing these examples. Obviously, it can be more succinct. It is repetitive. I gave these examples just for you guys to understand these 3 methods of how to use them. Does that make sense? And yes, exactly. Same amount of questions between math and ELA. So it's choice E because the way it's written right now, we have 2 completely independent sentences and they're just smushed together with 1 comma. And that's the commonly tested mistake that I put up here, which is called a run-on. So that's exactly what I was describing here. You cannot have 1 full sentence, comma, another full sentence. That's not grammatically correct. Instead, we need to use one of these 3 mechanisms. And the way that they fixed it is they added an and, which now comma and is allowed. Does that make sense? And there are 57 questions on ELA and math, both, as somebody said before. Okay, any questions so far? Can I keep going? All right, so I'm gonna keep going. So next we have read the sentence. Which revision uses the most precise language? So every single question, you want to make sure you understand what they're asking you for. So notice that when I'm reading the questions, I'm annotating, right? Here they cared about sentence structure, and right away that means something to me. What are they testing? What do they want from me? Here they're testing precision. So when you guys see the word precise, you want to think specific. They want you to be as specific as possible. And when I think specific, I'm thinking details, right? We want to be as specific as possible, quantitative or qualitative details, very, very, very specific details. So right now we have the Appalachian Trail is a really long trail that a lot of people do each year. So I'm thinking as I'm reading this, if I wanted to be more specific as a writer, where could I add detail? So here we see really long. So I'm like, what does really long mean, right? We can definitely be more specific. We can give a number, a quantitative value that will make this really specific. A lot of people, again, not specific at all. And then each year, again, we can potentially be more specific here also, which years. So we're looking for a choice that addresses some of these concerns. So extremely long is the same thing as saying really long. Millions of people is the same thing as saying a lot of people. We're still not specific. A is no good. The Appalachian Trail is a 2,200-mile trail that more than 1 million people hike each year. Okay, so now we gave a quantity to the trail, but more than 1 million. Can we be more specific? And choice C does exactly that. It says that 2 million people hike each year. So this is the most specific. They still have that quantitative value here. So C is our best answer. And then just to check choice D, D is doing the same thing. D, lengthy is another word for really long, so we're not really adding anything. Couple of million is the same exact thing as a lot. We're not being specific enough. So C is the best option here. So they say precise, you guys think specific, and specific means details. So I'll put that in the notes here too. It means be as detailed as possible. So some people are asking more of a strategy question. So somebody said, if I know that the answer is E, should I keep checking F, G, and H? So that's a very specific question. And to answer that, I'd say it depends on if you are a student that runs out of time on the exam or not. So if you're practicing and just learning, absolutely, we can go through the other options just as a learning moment. But if I'm taking the test and I'm pretty confident that it's E, I'll likely move on and I'll put like a little annotation that I didn't check the remainder of the choices, and I'll go back to it at the end. But if you have no time concerns ever, of course, why not double check? But usually in these timed moments, you want to make sure that you first pass the whole test, if that makes sense. All right. Next, number 4, it says which edits should be made to correct the sentence. So here they're not really giving us much in the question to annotate or go off of. So here there's nothing else to do except actually read the question and try to look out for a mistake. So we have in 1962, the agile, athletic Wilt Chamberlain became the first and only professional basketball player in the United States to score 100 points in a single game. So if you take a look at the answer choices, all of them are about commas, right? So we need to think, when do we use a comma, right? What are the many different ways, or why would we use a comma, right? So in general, when would we use a comma? So there's a lot of different places in the English language for commas and grammar. And one we already covered actually earlier with combining sentences. So that'll be number 1 on our list, right? So we use a comma when we combine sentences, and that's just comma and fanboy. We also use commas for dates, for cities, so things like that, for addresses. We also use a comma whenever we're listing things. So I can say I like apples, comma, bananas, comma, and strawberries. So these are really the big ways that we use commas. There's definitely more. We also use commas, not necessarily if it's to combine two complete sentences, but we also use it to combine a dependent and an independent clause, which is important. So dependent, comma, independent. So dependent is important. So what are they testing here? When would we need to use a comma? We have two adjectives here, both agile and athletic are adjectives to describe this person, Wilt Chamberlain. So we're listing attributes about him, right? So somebody is pretty, comma, smart, and interesting. So whenever we're listing anything, whether it's nouns or adjectives, we always need to put a comma. So here they're testing choice 3 on our list. They're testing a list. And the list here is agile and athletic. And between this list, we need to put a comma. So our answer here is choice E. Okay, any questions so far? I think we have one more independent, and then we'll move on to a passage so you guys can see what that looks like. So this is more complicated because they want us to read the full paragraph and they want us to find a set of revisions. So not just one, but two things are wrong. And just looking at the options really quickly, we can see that here they're testing comma. So that's something that we talked about. Why would we use a comma? And they're also, it seems like they're also going to be testing tenses. So tenses is something that a lot of students struggle with. We have a whole lesson on it. And a whole independent lesson on it. But one rule that you guys can take away right away is we want all the tenses to match. So that's really, really important. We cannot shift tenses from sentence to sentence within sentences in a whole paragraph. The tense has to stay the same. So that's something that I'm always thinking about, consistency of tense and plurality. Those two things have to stay the same. So if I'm talking about everything in singular, everything has to remain singular. And if I'm describing everything in past tense, everything in my paragraph better be in past tense. So those are the two rules that you're keeping in mind as I'm about to read this paragraph. So we have, when coal was used to heat homes, it frequently left soot stains on the walls. So right away from the first paragraph, they're setting the tense for us, and we see that it's past tense. So we have was used and left. So this is right away telling us it's past tense. So right away, I'm kind of considering that whatever answer choice I pick better be in past tense. So now I keep reading. It says brothers Cleo and Noah McViker, who owned a cleaning product company, created a doughy substance to help people remove this soot. Over time, as natural gas becomes more common, people had little need for soot cleansers, and the McVickers family company struggled to stay in business. So notice what I'm highlighting. I'm highlighting all of the verbs because I'm highlighting all of the verbs because I can tell that they're testing me about tenses. So I'm highlighting all of the verbs to see, does the tense shift? And becomes ends in an S, and this is future tense, versus struggled, ed is an ending for past tense, had little, past tense. So this is telling us that there is a problem here, right? I said everything has to match, and here things don't match. So right away, I know that these are out because this was a mistake. So now either A or C is my answer. So now I need to figure out the comma situation. So if we keep reading, it says, then one day Joe McVickers, Cleo's son, learned that his sister-in-law had been using the substance for art projects in her classroom. So he remarketed the product as the toy known as Play-Doh. And I just read the last sentence to make sure, and there's no mistake there. So now let's see where the comma belongs. So first off, in the first sentence, we have a comma here, and I just want to take this as a learning opportunity. Remember when I told you guys that commas could also be used to combine dependent and independent clauses? So that's exactly what's going on here. So it frequently left soot stains on the wall is a fully independent thought. This could stand by itself. This could be a complete independent thought. It would be right if this was a capital letter and this ended in a period. And the way that I know that is we have a subject, which is it. Pronouns and nouns can be subjects. And then we have a verb, left soot stains. So this is completely independent on its own. Now, what about this first part? When coal was used to heat homes, this is dependent. When coal was used to heat homes cannot stand by itself as an independent clause. It begs the question of like what happened. And words like when or regardless, since, therefore, things like that are very common words that are used to start dependent clauses. So that's another thing that we teach, a bunch of words that you guys can associate with dependent clauses that tells you that there should be a comma after that phrase. And when is one of those words. So the comma here is completely correct. So that tells me that choice A is not correct. We should not delete that comma because a comma belongs between a dependent and independent clause. So at this point, just by process of elimination, I know the answer is C. But just for the learning opportunity, let's discuss why the answer is C. So we have brothers Cleo and Noah McVicker, who owned a cleaning product company, created blah, 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 blah. So another way that we use commas is to describe a noun. So I can say Olga, who is a second-year medical student, is teaching this webinar. And notice here that the subject is me, right? The subject is Olga. And the verb, what am I doing? I'm teaching. Here's my verb, is teaching. And all of this part in the middle, this is just extra. This is extra information that is describing Olga. And whenever you have this sort of pattern of you have a noun and then you have extra information that's just adding detail to the noun, that is unnecessary. That's extra. And whenever we have this sort of extra phrase, we surround it by commas. And the way that you can prove to yourself that it's extra, and sometimes I tell students to do this, is go ahead and cross it out, and the sentence will still make sense. It's going to be Olga is teaching this webinar, which still makes sense. Fully independent, can stand by itself, can exist by itself. Nothing is wrong there. So that's how you can check that this is extra. So let's now do it here. So who owned a cleaning product company? So this part that I'm highlighting is just describing the brothers. So if we remove that part, it says brothers Cleo and Noah created a doughy substance, which again is a full sentence. It can stand entirely by itself. So once we know that this is that extra clause, that extra just descriptive clause, that clause always needs to be covered in 2 commas. That's kind of how you know that you can plop it out, right? It's bounded by these 2 commas. That's how you know that you can pick it up and throw it out and just make sure that the sentence makes sense without that. So we need another comma here to make that clear, that this is just an extra phrase describing the subject. And that's exactly what choice C says. And this is something that you commonly see on the SHSAT. Sometimes what they do is they create a subject-verb disagreement, and they put this phrase in between to confuse students. So for example, what they could do is they could say something like this, and they can put an R here. So Olga, who's teaching a second-year medical student, Olga, who is a second-year medical student, are teaching this webinar. So sometimes students won't connect that Olga is the subject and R is the predicate, and that these don't match in subject-verb, just because there's this huge phrase in between. So that's why I always tell you guys, when you see 2 commas and you recognize that the phrase is just describing the main noun or the main subject, go ahead and cross it out and make sure that the subject-verb matches, because that's another way that they can sort of get you. Sorry. All right, so that was the last standalone question for today. We're going to go on to grammar passages. Any questions on anything that we sort of touched on so far before I move on? I want to make sure that we get through 1 grammar passage and 1 reading passage, just so you guys get a sample of every type of thing that you could see on the reading section. And then I'll pause for questions, okay? Anybody have anything that can't wait until the end before I keep going? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to a revising editing passage, and then we're going to skip forward and do a whole reading passage. So the way that I take care of these grammar passages is usually I don't read the full passage just for time management. So reading comprehension, 100% you have to read the whole thing because it matters. The events matter, everything matters. Here, they're testing you for sort of comprehension of mechanics, of whether sentence 1 matches with sentence 2, whether sentence 2 flows into sentence 3, whether all the sentences in paragraph 2 are under the same umbrella or topic sentence. So usually I jump to the questions and I use the questions to go back and read certain parts of the passage. And you end up reading most of the passage through the questions anyways, but this saves us time because we're not fully reading for comprehension here. We don't really care about the events because that's not what they're going to test us on. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to question 6 and look what we see. We see the word precise, and we went over the word precise today. So when you guys see the word precise in a question, you should think about specific. And when you think about specific, you should think about details. So we're going to use the same sort of clue words, the same strategies here. and they want an example of sentence 2. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read sentence 1 and 2 just to see what it's about. And in my head, as I'm reading, I'm looking for any broad term that I could replace with a more specific detail, just like we did in that standalone question a few minutes ago. So it says, many people believe that they gain a greater sense of purpose by giving their time to serve others. These are the people who spend their free time volunteering at various places within the community. So the main thing here is various places, right? I can be specific, which places, where in the community are they volunteering? So that's what I'm sort of looking for as I go into the answer choices. So we have, these are the people who spend their free time volunteering at animal shelters, helping activities in community centers, or cleaning up parks. So this is exactly what we're looking for, right? It's giving us specific examples of where they're volunteering. So far it looks like choice E is good, but I'm just going to double check the rest of the answers because maybe we can be more specific about people as well. So next choice we have, these are the people who spend their free time helping in numerous ways at a variety of places, events, organizations. So again, not specific, just different ways of being broad. Numerous ways, variety of places, which ways, which places. We're not given specific details. This is no good. Next choice, these are the people who spend their free time working at local establishments that help people, animals, or other groups. So slightly more specific because we're getting local establishments, but again, I want the most specific, right? And so far E is still winning because this isn't specific enough. And then lastly, these are the people who spend a lot of time volunteering at places where they can help people in many ways. Again, which ways, right? Tell it to me exactly. So we confirm that E is the best answer. Jumping to the next one, which sentence should follow sentence 4 to introduce the main claim of the passage? So now this question gets a little bit complicated because they want the main idea. And so far I haven't read the whole passage, right? So I don't know the main idea. So what I would do from a strategy point of view at this point is I would skip this question for now. I'd answer the rest of the questions about this passage because probably it's going to take me through the rest of the passage and then I'll know the main idea and I can come back to this. So I'm going to jump to question 8. It says, which sentence is least relevant to the ideas presented in the second paragraph and should be deleted? So now they're asking us for something that's irrelevant. So I'm going to read all of paragraph 2. I'm going to figure out what the main idea is. And as I'm reading, I'm looking for like the random, like what's not contributing to the main idea at all. So let's do that now. So now we're focusing on the second paragraph here. So it says, for many students, this proposition may sound impossible. And the proposition is obviously, as the title says, finding time to volunteer. Schoolwork can require hours of study each day or each week. Volunteering at a retirement center or homeless shelter requires both time and energy. So we jumped from schoolwork to this random sentence about volunteering. So I'm a little bit suspicious already because I don't see sort of the relationship between 6 and 7, but I want to see what 8 is about. And 8 says extracurricular activities fill up after school time. So notice that we're talking about schoolwork, and then the next logical step is to talk about after school, right? Which is right here. So sentence 6 and 8 are connected. They make sense, but sentence 7 is a bit random. And sometimes what they do is to trick you guys, they make the random sentence still relevant. So volunteering, you may think is relevant because this whole passage is about volunteering, but we care about sentence relationships. So we don't want to break up a sentence like 6 and 8 because they flow into each other. It's the logical progression. So the fact that sentence 7 is smacked there in the middle is already a red flag in my head that that's probably the answer. If we keep reading, now they talk about family obligations. So this is still making sense. Other things that are difficult to schedule. And then we have, however, if students can find time to volunteer, they may find the benefits outweigh the scheduling difficulties, which is a nice ending. It's basically saying, despite all of these examples that we just gave, if they do find the time, volunteering is still positive. So I'm pretty convinced that sentence 7 is the one that's random. And you'll see that often. You don't want to break up. If two sentences, you are sure that they go together and something's breaking them up, that's likely to be your answer. So this here is going to be sentence 7. And we're ready to move on. Number 9, which of these would best follow sentence 12 and support the ideas in the third paragraph? So we care about transitioning from sentence 12, and we also care about the main idea of the third paragraph. So now I'm going to go read the third paragraph and then focus on sentence 12 because that's what they specifically ask about. So it says, to begin with, students who engage in volunteer activities acquire valuable skills and experience, which can help them focus on potential fields of study and career options. Furthermore, when students list volunteer work on college apps, admission counselors see applicants who care about making their community and college campus a better place. So it seems like this whole paragraph is talking about the benefits of volunteering. So that's the main idea in my head. What are the benefits of volunteering? And now they want to know what would follow sentence 12. So I'm thinking about another way of like the question ended, or the paragraph ended rather, with how volunteering can be beneficial on like a college app. So I'm thinking about the logical progression from that. So if we read choice A, it says these students show that they're likely to be responsible, reliable, and helpful young adults. Admission counselors know that character traits like this will benefit the applicants as well as whomever they interact with. So the main subject in sentence 12 is admissions counselors. And now this sentence is mentioning admission counselors, but it's not sort of supporting that. It's kind of saying the same exact thing. And it's not talking about the main idea in the whole paragraph, which is how the benefits outweigh the negatives of volunteering. So this is just very repetitive from sentence 12 itself. I don't think that it's adding anything, which is why I'm not really sold on this. Next, we have volunteering can help students meet new people who can provide references and advise the students who, when they're applying to college. It can also be an invaluable opportunity for the students to meet possible future employers. So sentence 11 discusses potential academic and professional connections through volunteering, but then sentence 12 already changed the topic to college admissions. So if like this is now going back to connections. So again, like I told you guys before, we don't want to break off two sentences that are connected. So B is good because it makes sense with sentence 11, but no good because we already moved on to sentence 12. So this is how I know B is not the answer. Now, C says the counselors hope that young adults who demonstrate this behavior will go on to volunteer during their college years, working on campus and student government, blah, 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 blah. So now this is kind of going off gear. So this is on gear with sentence 12 about the admissions counselors, and it's following the idea that the counselors are favoring the students, but it's not supporting the whole idea of what paragraph 3 is trying to argue for, which is that volunteering is beneficial for the students. And then the last one is many colleges are looking for students who are not just academically successful, but who work well with others and care about improving and serving communities. So this is a good ending sentence because it talks about the colleges and counselors again. It mentions that, but it also supports the whole sort of umbrella of the third paragraph of why people should volunteer, because they're going to get into college, right? So that's the main idea of that paragraph. So D is our answer here. And also notice that D is succinct as well. So usually if I'm stuck between two answer choices, I go for the more succinct one. Does that make sense? B is incorrect because it only focuses, like, you see how they're talking about references? That's something that they mentioned in sentence 11, and we already switched gears. Does that make sense? Like here, we were talking about career options and references, and now we switched to the college idea. So we don't want to go flip-flop back. Does that make sense? Okay, so last one. Which concluding sentence should replace sentence 22 to provide the best support for the arguments presented in this passage? So now we're reading sort of the conclusion. And I'm going to go ahead and read these last two paragraphs just to make sure that we didn't miss anything that should go into the conclusion. So it says students who volunteer undoubtedly make positive investments in their future, but they also affect the present quality of life. Studies have shown that volunteering is good for both the mind and the body. Volunteering can boost mood levels, it can reduce anxiety. According to the Mayo Clinic, the feeling of doing something meaningful and the appreciation received from that can also reduce stress. Even the busiest of students can find a way to donate some time to a worthy cause. Even though managing different commitments may seem overwhelming at times, students are sure to feel a sense of fulfillment in volunteerism. So for a conclusionary paragraph, we're looking for something that touches on everything that we talked about. And we're looking for, usually for conclusions, they make sort of one thing they do is a call to the past. So you want to summarize everything you talk about. And another thing they commonly do in the conclusion is like a call to action of like what we should do next. So those are usually the two ideas that I'm thinking about as I'm reading a conclusionary sentence. So choice E says, in every city, there are homeless shelters, food pantries, youth centers, political campaigns that depend on the commitment and support of hardworking young people. So I would say that this is a little bit too specific for a conclusion sentence. So for a conclusion sentence, we want to think broad and we want to think something that supports the whole paragraph. And this is a bit too specific of a detail. Next, we have clearly students who volunteer will experience a host of benefits, such as learning new skills, meeting interesting people, opening up opportunities for the future, and gaining a sense of satisfaction. So overall, this seems like a good choice, but what's making me a little bit hesitant is this word clearly. You'll notice that on SHSAT passages, they don't usually take a really strong view unless it's an argument. Usually the authors always are kind of like toggling and being a little bit more balanced, right? So they're being more fair. They're looking at two sides of it, which is kind of something that we saw in this passage. They're saying volunteering is great, but there's this counter claim of like students have no time because they're so busy. So a word like clearly is kind of very strong, and we want to stay away from this sort of intense, strong language in a choice on the SHSAT, unless you're reading a very clear, opinionated piece, which is unlikely. In my tutoring experience and academic career, I haven't seen maybe one passage that took a very strong view. Usually they're very kind of in the middle, because that's what makes for a good argument. You see both sides. So when I see a word like clearly, right away I'm hesitant. They want you to fall for that trap because everything else sounds good, but it's a trap. And that's why we're covering it here. Next, it says, when students carefully evaluate their activities and prioritize volunteerism, they find a way to work it into their schedule and are soon encouraging their peers to do the same. So this is okay. It's touching on things, but it's not summarizing all of the benefits of volunteering, which is what we read about. So I don't think that this is an ample, it can belong somewhere in the passage, but it's not like a strong conclusion. And then finally, whether they're seeking admission to college, preparing to enter the workforce, or simply looking to reduce stress, high school students who volunteer can help themselves as much as they can help others. So this is great because it's touching on something from every paragraph. And that's kind of how you can tell that you have a good conclusion sentence. So admission to college, we talked about that in paragraph 2. Preparing to enter the workforce, I think, was mentioned in paragraph 2 and also in paragraph 3. And then reduce stress is that last paragraph that I just read. So it's touching on a detail from each paragraph, and it's a good summary. And it mentions volunteering, which is what the whole thing is about. So H is a great concluding sentence. And lastly, we want to not forget to go back to 7. What should follow sentence 4 to introduce the main claim? So now we understand that the main claim is sort of that students volunteering is a positive, but there might be some form of, there may be some like counter argument of that it's students are too busy. So we want something that kind of touches on both. And I want to read sentence 4 to make sure. So sentence 4 says, however, research shows that those who volunteer also receive benefits. So next, we have choice A says, with that in mind, high school students should consider engaging in some form of regular volunteerism. So this is pretty fair. The passage argues for this, that people should volunteer. And with that in mind is a good transition from sentence 4. So we also care about transitions. So the transition makes sense and the sentence makes sense. Choice B says, fortunately for students, these benefits are guaranteed to produce both immediate and long-term results. So this is another example of something that's way too intense, right? Guaranteed is way too strong language that I just told you guys to avoid. So B is right away a no. C says, in fact, studies have confirmed that that volunteerism can be beneficial. So we talk about how it's beneficial later on. This is a little bit too specific to end the introduction with, right? It's not, again, when we're thinking main claim, the same as ending, we want a broad general statement. And choice C is a little bit too specific of a detail. It's talking about specific studies. So that's no good. And then D, for this reason, high school students should learn about how helping others can strengthen their communities. Kind of similar with A, but A is more of like that call to action that I mentioned before, that they should volunteer, rather than learn about volunteering is like a step removed. So we want the most direct, and that's going to be choice A in this case. All right, anybody have any questions so far? I know that it's nearing 8 o'clock, but I want to make sure that I talk at least briefly about how to go through a reading comprehension pathway. Is that okay with everybody for me to take some extra time to do a reading comp, or do you guys want me to stop and ask questions and then whoever wants to stay for the reading comp? Okay, so I'm getting a lot of yeses. So if nobody objects that I'm going to take probably 10 more minutes and I'll go quickly to get through the reading comp and then we'll stay for questions. Is that all right with everybody? All right, great. So reading comprehension is completely different than the way that we just read this passage. For this, you absolutely need to read the passage. So that's going to take some of our time. I'm going to read this out loud for us, and I'm going to stop and teach you guys on, like, as I'm reading this, what am I focusing on? What am I thinking about? And then we can maybe go through like 1 or 2 questions. We don't have to do all of them just because I don't want to keep you guys over time. I just want to sort of start your wheels of thinking about how to read passages. So usually when I'm reading a passage, I start with the title. That can tell you a lot, and that can kind of sort of set the tone of like what I'm about to be reading about. Is it nonfiction? Is it fiction? What part of my brain do I have to use? So champion of the channel in this case isn't actually telling me much. So we're going to go ahead and jump into reading it. And when we're reading, you have to be really, really, really on for the introduction. So you have to be on for all of the paragraphs, obviously, when you're taking a test, but intro is really important. How the author opens the passage, you're going to learn a lot of things in this first paragraph. You're going to learn genre, which is really important because that's going to tell me what am I thinking of. If I realize that this is sort of like a nonfiction piece, like a journal article or something that I'd read in a newspaper, that's telling me that each paragraph is going to have a topic sentence. So that means that this is going to be an easier passage for me to read. I'm going to look for topic sentences, and I'm going to sort of make myself a roadmap of everything that the passage is about using the topic sentence of each paragraph. If you start reading the first paragraph and you're noticing that this is a fiction story, it's fantasy, it's nothing that you've ever heard of before, or it's a story with characters and there's dialogue involved, now you're using a completely different part of your brain. Now we're caring about literary devices, we're caring about characterization, who said what, how did that make them feel, what is the turning point of the story. So the first paragraph is really important to sort of frame your mind of what kind of passage you're reading, how you're going to be thinking about it. So let's go ahead and start reading the first paragraph. So it says, in 1926, an editor at the London Daily News predicted that Gertrude Ederell, an American swimmer with 18 world records and 3 Olympic medals, would fail in her attempt to swim across the English Channel. So this guy, some editor, is claiming that this person is going to fail in her attempt to swim across the English Channel. He claimed that even the most uncompromising champion of the rights and capacities of women must admit that in contests of physical skill, speed, and endurance, they must remain forever the weaker sex. Yet at only 19 years old, Ederell not only became the first woman to accomplish this feat, she also broke the men's record by 2 hours. Gertrude Ederell's triumphant swim across the English Channel was a testimony to her determination, innovative spirit, and passion for swimming. So, this is our main idea. And notice that quotes are important because they're putting quotes in and then there was probably going to be a question on it. So right away, I'm analyzing this quote in my head and I can see that this is 1926. I'm thinking about women's rights and this editor publicly saying that a woman won't be able to do this because she's a woman. So I'm thinking from this sort of mindset, right? So we have a male editor who goes on and says that a woman won't be able to do something and then she does it. And that's how they're setting up the story. And Gertrude Ederell is obviously our sort of main topic for this story. So that's everything that I sort of pulled out of this first paragraph. And just for a teaching moment, this is not something at all that I would pay attention to if I'm reading this for comprehension, but because we talked about it in the grammar, notice we have our subject here, right? Gertrude Ederell, and then we have a comma here and a comma here. And in between this whole phrase, we're just describing Gertrude Ederell. So for grammar purposes, it's completely legal to take this whole thing out and the sentence should still make sense. So I just wanted to mention that because that's something that we discussed before. Okay, so now I'm going to keep reading. It says, crossing the English Channel is a daunting task for any swimmer. At its narrowest point, the channel measures 21 miles across. Its icy waters hover around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Its unruly tides and currents toss swimmers about like bobbing corks, stinging jellyfish, seafood, floating debris from shipwrecks, added hazards. So this is all about the difficulties of crossing the channel. So I would annotate this and I would just write difficulties for myself to know that this is all the difficulties of crossing the channel. And they give us all these details. It's cold, it's long, there's debris, there's animals, there's tides that we can't predict. So all of this whole paragraph is about how hard it is to do it. Next paragraph. For decades, the channel's perils have defeated countless swimmers. Ederel too first failed in her first attempt to cross the channel in 1925. Just 6 miles short of finishing, she became ill, and her coach had to haul her out of the water. Undeterred, Ederel decided to try again. Ederel knew that if she did not complete the challenge this time, she might never get the opportunity to set a record because a rival female swimmer was preparing to make her second attempt at crossing as well. So here I would just write something like second attempt. So this is a second attempt and people have failed at it. And these little annotations is what I meant by my roadmap. So when they ask me a question, I know exactly which paragraph to go back to retrieve the detail that they're asking me about. Next paragraph, to prepare for the marathon swim, Ederel found ways to improve her equipment. So preparation and improvement is the keywords that stick out to me. And I'm going to guess that the rest of this paragraph is all details on how she prepared, how she improved. She and her sister Meg discovered that melted candle wax perfectly sealed goggle edges, effectively waterproofing her goggles against the waves. The sisters also designed a two-piece silk swimsuit. During her first channel crossing attempt, she had worn a standard one-piece that after the lengthy hours of swimming across the channel had stretched out, filling with water and creating drag, making an already challenging task almost insurmountable. Unlike the cumbersome typical bathing suit, the silk invention weighed little and allowed for easy movement. So here I would write sort of something like preparations or improvements. Next, we have on August 6, 1926, Ederel waded into the channel near Cape Grisnez, France. At first, she shivered in the bone-chilling water, even though she had covered her body in 8 layers of grease for insulation. Her limbs felt stiff, her strokes were irregular. Diving forward, she fought to clear her mind and find what she called her sphere, a place where the sea became her only companion and the shrieks of the gulls and the humming of the boat engines faded away. So again, I see a word in quotes, and that's important to me because in my experience, they seem to ask about that. So sort of this paragraph is about her finding her sort of her vibe, right? Her rhythm to get through the swim. All right, next paragraph. Throughout Ederel's swim, 2 tugboats accompanied her. One carried newspaper reporters who wired dispatches of her progress to shore. The other displayed a sign that read, "This way, old kid," with an arrow pointing forward, transported her coach, family, and friends. Her coach played songs such as "Yes, We Have No Bananas" on a phonograph so Ederel could time her strokes to the rhythm. Using a net, they also passed her baby bottles of broth for nourishment. So here I would write something like support team. And here I would write like swam began, right? The beginning of her swim. Next, we have for hours, Ederel swam, dodging debris with an amused smile. However, as she neared the English shore, a sudden fierce storm erupted. So all of a sudden, we have the word however and sudden. This is keywords for a turning point, right? Something different is happening. She was swimming, and now, there is a turning point or a difference in the story. The tides and waves forced Ederel backwards, and she fought the stubborn swells for hours. The salty water caused her tongue to swell and inflamed her ears, yet Ederel felt indescribably happy as she turned through the sea. Finally, as she neared the English shore, the storm abated, the tide turned. No longer fighting against her, the sea pushed her towards shore and victory. So here we sort of have like end of the race, like turning point / end. After 14 hours and 31 minutes, Ederel on wobbly legs stepped onto the English shore. The waiting crowd roared, honked, their automobiles blasted their tugboat whistles, set flares off. She swum into history. So I would pay attention to this also because it's sort of like a metaphor. She didn't literally swim into history, but she made history on the swim is what the author's trying to say. And this is a literary device that they also test on. And then finally, the conclusion. When Ederel returned to New York, she received a parade where thousands of people shouted Trudy. Not only were everyday American citizens proud of Ederel, but she also inspired them to be more active. Over the next few years, more than 60,000 people credited her with motivating them to earn their American Red Cross swimming certificates. Gertrude Ederel's accomplishments proved to the world that with determination and passion, it was possible for a person to achieve his or her goals. So sort of a happy ending to a story, and we have a roadmap of all of the events that happened. And when they give you a table or a chart, you don't have to pay super special attention to it, but there probably will be a question on it. So we're going to have to probably go back to this chart doing the questions. So let me see how many questions I can run through, and then we'll sort of stop. So it says, what do the newspaper editor's comments in paragraph 1 reveal about the challenges Ederell faced? So if you guys remember, that's what the quote that I underlined, and I said, pay attention to this, right? This guy is saying that she potentially cannot do it because she's a woman. So we're looking for an answer choice that touches on sort of those socio-political circumstances of that time. Not only was this physically challenging, but she had different obstacles outside of the physicality of actually completing the swim, of being a woman that's completing the swim that she also had to sort of deal with. So if I read choice A, it says, regardless of her ability, being an American put her at a serious disadvantage. So that's not something that they touch on at all. And that's how you know in the reading comprehension that that's probably not a correct answer choice. If there's not even a mention of American versus London and nationality disputes, that's unlikely. Instead, we're looking for something socio-political, something that mentions women's rights or feminism, that sort of answer choice. So this is not correct. Next, she needed more training in order to succeed. Again, that's not something they talk about. She was well trained for this. She tried it before. And that has nothing to do with what the editor was talking about as well. While Ederell could participate in athletic competition, some were not comfortable because no woman had ever attempted it before. So we know that this is not just plainly false, and that's another way that you can eliminate answer choices on the SHSAT. We know that this is false because she attempted it before, and there's another woman that attempted it before her, and there's a whole table of everybody that completed it. So that's not true. And then finally, H is correct because it says Ederell still experienced social as well as physical obstacles. And the key word is social here because that's addressing the that specific quote from that editor that mentioned her being a woman. So that's what they mean by social. Next question says, which sentence is the best summary of the steps that Ederell took to prepare for her second attempt? So that's that paragraph that we mentioned exactly, improvements or preparations. So this keyword prepare and right here prepare, that's telling you where to look for. So all we have to do is find the details that they talked about in that specific thing, and that's going to be choice A. The waterproofing her goggles with the melted candle wax and the new silk bathing suit. Those are both specific details from that paragraph that we annotated. Next, they want us to read the sentence from paragraph 4. During her first channel crossing attempt, she had worn a standard one-piece swimsuit that after lengthy hours had stretched out and created drag, making an already challenging task insurmountable. So why did they use the word insurmountable? So insurmountable kind of means impossible or just not possible, right? Too difficult. So we're looking for a choice that is sort of highlighting how difficult it was. So how the bathing suit made it impossible for Ederell to make it across the challenge. So this is a little bit this is a fake answer choice, right? And the way that I know that is it's tricky because I just said the word impossible and now we have the word impossible here and they make a choice, the first choice that you're reading. So you may be tempted to pick that, but notice that we are staying away from like very strong words, and impossible is a strong word. Never is a strong word. So we're staying away from answer choices like that. So this is sort of a falsie. They want you to fall into this trap, but it's not. Exactly. Somebody said it, almost insurmountable, not completely impossible. So this is a little bit too dramatic. Next, how Ederell and her sister decided to improve in a creative way. So this is true, but that's not why they use the word insurmountable. So that's no good. Flaws made a difficult task even more complicated. This is fair, right? We're describing how something became even harder, but we're not going to the extreme that it's not possible at all. Okay, next, number 19, which statement describes how the author's use of a problem and solution structure in paragraph 5 contributes to the development of the ideas in the passage? So paragraph 5 is this paragraph here, and it's talking about all of the problems, right? So first she was cold, but she covered in insulation, then she felt stiff, and she kept going forward until she found her sphere, which is what I said we need to highlight. So I'm gonna look for an answer choice that has something to do with her sort of getting into her zone. And right here, I can see blocking out her discomfort. So this is a way of understanding that she's getting into her zone. All of these things are discomforting. She's cold, she's freezing, it's difficult to have her regular strokes, but it's showing us that it's both a mental and a physical challenge because she has to get into her sphere of mind. Does that make sense? So D is sort of the choice here. And I'm moving quickly because I'm over time. So if you guys have specific questions on the answer choices, I can go back to them. But I want to make sure that I get through this whole first passage. Next, we have which best supports that she succeeded in swimming because of her innovative approach. So we're looking for a choice that has to do with innovative. So innovative in my head means like new, means different, means not like everybody else. So in my head, I'm thinking about creatives to synonyms to innovative right away. So we're thinking about new, we're thinking about creative, we're thinking about one of a kind, something like that. So let's look at the answer choices. And over here, I see the word new. So right away, that's telling me, oh, they're thinking how I'm thinking. Using a new overhand stroke, she eventually settled into a routine. So this is showing that she is using an innovative approach. She has new approaches that have not been used before. And that's exactly why it's innovative. Paragraph 7 contributes to the development of a central idea. How? So paragraph 7 was this paragraph here, and we labeled it turning point and also the end of her swim. So we're looking for something that has to do with that. So it says, illustrating that her physical strength and mental fortitude allowed her to stay focused. So the mental part was the paragraph before where we talked about her getting into her sphere or her zone. So this is no good. Next, conveying that Ederel pushed herself to the edge of her physical capabilities. Again, this isn't about the physicality of it. This paragraph was more about her emotional sort of appeal. They talk about how she was smiling the whole time. If we keep going, she was indescribably happy as she trenched through the sea, no longer fighting. The sea pushed her to victory. So in this paragraph, we're talking about her sort of emotional, right? Amused smile. So this paragraph before was about her mental, this one here, and this paragraph here is more about her emotional. So that's what I'm looking for in the answer choices. And that's right here, surge of emotion as she came closer to achieving. And in that paragraph, she does achieve it. She makes it to the end. Okay, next, the idea that many people were interested in her attempt to swim is illustrated in the passage mainly through. So the details that show that this was a big deal is like the newscast that was following her. It's the crowd that congratulated her once she made it to the London side. It's the parade in New York. So these are all the details that I can think of that show that this was a big event. Many people were interested. So I'm looking for an answer choice that's talking about any one of those events. So, and that's right here, details about reports of her progress. That's the newscast that was following her on the boat. And also the celebration. That's all of the people that were celebrating her after on the London shore, but also in the parade in New York. Last two. So we have which sentence from the passage best conveys her perspective regarding Ederel's accomplishments. So we're looking for something positive, right? She accomplished what she set out to accomplish, and the author is inspective about the impact. The key word here is impact. So why did it matter? And remember when I told you guys, focus on that line about how she swum into history? This is the impact of her swim, right? Right after the author said that, in the next paragraph, they talk about her impact on all the other people, that many people in America now became more motivated to be fit. Many women felt that they now could accomplish these physical feats that women haven't accomplished before. So that's why they said that she swum into history. It's a sort of metaphor or saying to show that this was impactful. She made history and she changed the future as a result of it. So that's why this one's D. And then finally, their talk about the table. I told you there's always a question if they give you a table or a graph, you want to pay attention to that. How does it support the information in paragraph 9? So in the last paragraph, they talked about the impact that she made, how she motivated many other people. And if we go back to the table, we can see that after her, another woman did it and she beat her time. Iveta, right? And we can see female. So in this way, she motivated or made it possible for now this woman to also swim and have her own success. And that's choice E. People have continued to swim and have reduced the speed record. And it's supporting the information in 9 because that's an impact that Gertrude made. Ederel made, rather. Okay, so I know that I ran through that. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't run too long. So at this point, I can take any questions at all about my sort of academic history, the test. I will email the notes out to Mrs. Queller, and then she'll send them out to all of you guys. So I can stay as long as anybody needs for any questions. And then anybody that doesn't have any questions and doesn't want to listen, you guys are free to go. Thank you so much for joining. I hope this was helpful. I tried to pack as much sort of content and review and what the test is like into like a 1-hour session. So I hope that you guys all benefited, okay? Somebody asked what high school I went to. I graduated from Staten Island Technical High School. Somebody said, how long do I recommend reading each passage? So usually there's like 5 or 6 passages. I try to stick to about 10 minutes per passage. And usually I would say like 8 to 15 minutes, right? So some passages are going to take you 8, and then those passages that you save the minutes on, you can spend 15 minutes on a harder one. 10 is a nice in between to sort of average. Sure, this was recorded. So I'm sure that will get out to you guys, and you can always email me specifically if you don't have access to the notes or to the recording, and I will reply to you. And I'll just put my email in the chat. It's just olgabamd@quellerprep.com. So somebody said, would reading help with the ELA part? 100%. The more you read, the faster you'll be at it, which is important, and the faster you'll have comprehension. So I definitely recommend reading as much as possible. I specifically recommend reading like opinion articles or things with like a perspective, like what's the author's point, because that's kind of how you'll be tested here. For time management, one tip is practice. Another tip is understanding what you're good at and bad at. Another tip is not reading the grammar passages the way that I did today and annotating your test. So if you're not sure about something, I usually have a coding system for myself. Like star means I'm kind of sure, but if I have extra time, go back to it. Circle means definitely go back to it. So annotation helps you move through the test faster and know where you need to go back on. So that will save time as well. Somebody's asking me for any personal tips because they're feeling kind of afraid and anxious. Sorry, I'm not like up to date with the messages. I'm scrolling slowly, so I'll get to your question eventually, hopefully. So this is a very important concern that somebody's bringing up. Test anxiety is real. Everybody has it. I mean, I am now in medical school and people still struggle with this. So I think the most important thing is getting yourself into the right mindset and having a routine. That's something that really helps me. I know that I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do my morning routine, I'm going to have my breakfast, and then I'm going to take a practice test, or then I'm going to study for 2-3 hours. And having that routine makes me sort of more familiar and comfortable with like, okay, if I'm doing this every single day, when test day comes around, it'll just be like another day. And the more that you practice and the more confident you feel, if you cover the content and if you feel yourself improving and doing well, the anxiety dissipates a little bit. Somebody's asking me about cutoff scores. Those change every single year and they're never released exactly. You can Google them for an approximation, but I am not sure what it was for last year. Yes, during the summer courses, notes are always emailed out. That's how I did it with my students last year as well. I will retype my email. I'm just waiting to, if I retype it, all the questions will go down. So I wanted to make sure that I touched on all of them before. So I'll send it out in a second. Okay, here's my email. My full name is Olga Pinkasov, whoever needs that. Okay, so more questions about cutoff. Again, it's hard to say. It depends which school you want to get into. And these are all things that you guys can Google because they change every year and they're not officially released anyways. You're welcome to everybody saying thank you. I hope everybody benefited. If you guys have any questions in general, you can also email me for advice things. That would be perfectly fine. And most important tip to succeed in ELA, you have to know your grammar rules, I would say, and that helps you run through the grammar portion, and you have to practice the reading passages. What grade should you start prepping? Most students start prepping, I think, in the 6th, 7th grade, I would say. These practice tests are on the DOE website. There are 114 questions, not 750. You're welcome, everybody. Good luck. I think the max score is actually 800, but it's scaled. Thanks, everybody. Again, any questions or any concerns, you can feel free to reach out. You're welcome. Good luck, guys. If there's no questions, I'm probably going to end this. I'm going to stick around for maybe 2 to 3 minutes for any last minute questions or concerns. Bye. Good luck. You're welcome. Good luck. All right, last call for any questions. I'm going to go ahead and end this session. Okay, I see a question. If it's strongly opinionated, yeah, but that's very unlikely. You're usually not going to get a passage with where the author is really taking a super, super strong stance and not even considering the other way. But if the author is using words like impossible and never and always, then that's completely okay for it to show up in a question, obviously. But in my experience, it's probably not going to happen. So if I'm stuck between two very similar choices, you have to think about anything else. So one thing that helps me is like the wordiness trick that I told you guys. One choice is likely to be less wordy, even a word less or 2 words less. And that's what we saw in one of the first questions that we did. So that's a good way to sort of do it. Another way is to find a choice that's really good, but has one thing wrong with it, like that word impossible. And that 100% makes that choice no, even if it's otherwise very strong. So those two sort of tips can help when you're stuck in that situation. Other than that, it kind of depends on the question and the passage and specifics. Okay, last call for any questions. If not, I'm gonna end this meeting for everybody. Thanks, guys, so much for turning up tonight. All right, so I'm ending it. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night. Bye. I'm going to end it now. Last call for questions. Okay, bye. Good night.